The Baltimore Ravens made an aggressive move on Thursday. They could potentially hint at their mindset over the next couple of days, weeks, or even months of the 2025 offseason. We talk about what it was and if the Ravens are gearing up for another big move, all that and more coming up next on Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Oestreicher of Ravens Wire, here with you on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much for being here on this Purple Friday, making us your first listen of the day and just a part of your day in general. We're free and available for you on all podcasting platforms. So in video form on YouTube, you can like and subscribe to the channel. And in audio form, you can follow along and subscribe as well. We're a 5-day-a-week daily Ravens podcast. So Monday through Friday, we have you covered every single weekday. Then we go live when there's some big Ravens news. We go live after the games and also on the weekends when the headlines are there. We talk about it all here on Locked On Ravens. Today's episode of Locked On Ravens is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Sam Njoku of the Ravens Talk podcast is back with us here on this Friday to dive into what has been, honestly, Sam, not just a crazy week for the Ravens. It is one of the crazier free agency starts I can remember. Usually there's always a couple of big moves that happen. Guys are flying off the board. But really, even over those first couple of days, it felt like there was just a big move happening every 30 minutes. There was a signing every 5 minutes that was going on. And we're here on Friday, and still moves are trickling in. And we might not be done with this whole thing, even from a Ravens perspective.
Yeah, it's a big day. A big off season for a lot of these teams. A lot of teams feel like they're very close to getting either into playoff position or potentially winning a Super Bowl. So a lot of key moves being made for these various teams. The Ravens are no different. Most of their moves are bringing in guys and keeping guys like Ronnie Stanley and such. And so the Ravens have done a very good job of doing their best to keep their own, not like last season where they had to let a few guys go. Of course, things may change in the upcoming days, but for the most part, the Ravens are doing a very good job of keeping talent in and preparing for the future.
Yeah, and I'm glad you made the point of things changing, because things can change literally on a minute-to-minute basis during the NFL offseason. So something we talk about here today might not be what's going on tomorrow. That's just the craziness of how the offseason works. And with the way that the Ravens offseason has gone, Sam, they've made a couple of those re-signings. They've added a couple of outside guys, and of course, they've lost players as well. So we'll dive into a full recap more so in the final part of the show. But the Ravens made a pretty aggressive move on Thursday. I feel like that's the big storyline heading into today. Marlon Humphrey, Sam, we had talked about this for a decent long time before the offseason began, and even as free agency crept up on us here. Some restructure or extension was probably going to happen with Marlon Humphrey. Well, that ended up happening. Brian McFarland, friend of this show, and I know friend of your show as well. Brian McFarland breaking the news here. The Ravens have done a max restructure with Marlon Humphrey by reducing his $18 million salary and roster bonus to the league minimum of $1.255 million and converting $16.745 million to a bonus. 2 void years were added on. The restructure ends up creating $13.396 in 2025 cap space. So it's essentially borrowing some future cap space to get some cap space this offseason, regardless of what the extension or restructure looked like, Sam. We always thought Marlon was one of the ways the Ravens could have freed up a little bit of money. And we didn't know how much of that money would have been freed up. $13 million. I was not expecting that number. That is a very aggressive move for the Ravens. What was kind of your reaction when you first heard about it? Because I think there are multiple different outcomes that this could end up having for Baltimore.
Well, my first thought was, the Ravens want to win. And they want to win now. They're not going to try and sugarcoat things. The Ravens in the past 10 years or so have done a very good job of trying their best to not mortgage the future for the present, And this move tells me, okay, well, the present is now. The Ravens don't want to wait. They don't want to take any chances. If there's a big move to be made, they want to make sure they have the salary cap space in order to make that happen. It also still tells me that potentially we could be looking at the end of Marlon Humphrey's tenure in Baltimore. I was very much considering an extension to be a major possibility for Marlon Humphrey, but the Ravens took the avenue of restructuring, which tells me either the Ravens weren't able to get an extension done because they didn't want one, or Marlon Humphrey's asking price was too high, and the Ravens took the route of restructuring. Now, of course, things could change next offseason. The Ravens could decide to extend Marlon Humphrey, but the way things are trending, it leads me to believe that this is likely nearing the end of the Marlon Humphrey's tenure in Baltimore. And what better way than to get Marlon Humphrey out of the Baltimore than to win a championship. So the Ravens are doing their best to do that. Max restructuring, good news for Marlon Humphrey, getting some more talent in here perhaps to help him get that championship. But I'm looking ahead, and it looks like no extension means possibly the end of Marlon Humphrey's tenure.
Yeah, and I think that with Marlon, there was always a question, even obviously going into last year, what his future would look like, because he had an injury-plagued year. There were questions about whether he was worth the money. He went out there last year, had just a baller year, best year of his career, and he was someone that was invaluable to that Ravens defense. And so this frees up money, but for Marlon, do they take another corner early in the draft? Do they trade for somebody? Cough, cough, Jair Alexander. I know that's our guy. That's both of our guy. We want Jair in Baltimore. So please, Green Bay, 5th round pick. The Ravens have a lot of these picks here. So that could be an option for them. But the Ravens also had to make a move like this. They had to free up some cap space. Obviously, with the DeAndre Hopkins signing, some of the other moves they have made, we didn't really have a lot of these moves coming into Thursday, and I'm sure a couple more are coming down the pipeline, which we're going to talk about. But Brian McFarland also put together a cap sheet, at least as updated as he could make it at the time. And so right now, with everything factored in outside of Tylan Wallace or a couple other contracts, Michael Pierce, who retired, that is still being counted right now. So that money will be taken off the books. The Ravens with this $5.4 million in usable salary cap space, when you also factor in practice squad money that has to be set aside, draft class money that has to be set aside. So the fact that they were able to save $13 million on one move either will make it possible for them to not have to restructure other players and add void years and borrow future cap space, which I think is a good thing, or they will do that still. And this, we'll see how much do they want 2025? How aggressive are they going to get? This is the first step of an aggressive plan, it feels like. But to me, I feel like the Ravens could still have a couple more moves. But even so, this move was one that was necessary regardless.
Yeah, and we talked about it in previous shows. I still think there are 2 more moves that the Ravens will make, either extending Derrick Henry or Lamar Jackson. Lamar Jackson either want to get a restructure or an extension. I think that's just a formality at this point. It's just a matter of when. I think the Ravens are taking their time with the restructuring because I believe they still would like to get a deal done extension-wise. Josh Allen, who just won the MVP award, got his extension done. So the blueprint is there for Lamar Jackson to get his, add a couple extra $1 million to his bank account, and then, move on forward and create some cap space there. So there's still a lot of ways for the Ravens to extend this salary cap space for themselves. If they want to make another move, I know corner we talked about, it's a big move that the Ravens need to make with that hole that was left because of Brandon Stevens' exit. But they also need a new safety. I think that another safety would be great. Interior lineman is also a piece that the Ravens could possibly put into their wheelhouse. But I think they would love to add some free agent pieces, maybe not huge pieces, but small pieces here and there so that they can enter the draft taking the best player available. So I would not be surprised if an extension or restructuring is done for Lamar Jackson, and we'll see what the Ravens try and do with Derrick Henry. This is more a little difficult because he does have 1 year remaining, but Lamar Jackson for sure, I expect a restructure or extension coming up very shortly.
Yeah, and again, the blueprints for both quarterback and running back contracts have shifted over the last week or so with Saquon Barkley and Josh Allen. It's just smart to get both those guys done because it will continue to shift. A prime example of this is the Bengals, where they have been dug in over $1 million. And Jake Liscow, my colleague over at Locked On Bengals, put this out on social media, and I think he summarized it perfectly. Dig in on $1 million today just to lose $5 more million tomorrow, because that is how it goes, where especially these elite players, depending, and it doesn't matter, quarterback, running back, wide receiver, the elite guys want to one-up each other. Now, Josh Allen said he didn't do that. That was one thing he made clear. He didn't want to get the highest guaranteed money or whatever. He said, what's $5 million more going to do for me, or whatever he said. But regardless, I think just getting the Henry deal done, getting the Lamar deal done will free up that money, but you can't just, it's a negotiation process. Again, that's what it is. The Ravens aren't just going to say, okay, here you go. There you go. Just take it. It's going to be a process of meeting in the middle, finding a number. But Sam, when you talk about the Marlon Humphrey restructure, if you had to pick one side or the other, did they do this just out of necessity because they had to, or do you think they are gearing up for maybe a bigger move in the coming days or weeks? Which side do you kind of lean towards, or do you think it is smack dab in the middle? It's both.
I think they're gearing up for something. I'm not sure exactly where they go with this. They have max restructuring is huge, especially because you do have other avenues to create space. Mark Andrews being a guy that's potentially being moved, Lamar Jackson's extension or restructuring. There's a lot of cap space to be made. So to extend right now tells me that they're gearing up for something, at least potentially trying to get the cap space in order in case they want to make a move. So I would say just be on the lookout for something. I know Jair Alexander is the guy that everybody's talking about for the Ravens, and we'll see what happens. He could be cut. He might not even be traded one way or another, but the Ravens are trying to make a move somewhere, somehow to increase the talent in this roster, which is already stacked right now on both sides of the ball.
What's your opinion on Marlon just as a player right now? Because, again, restructure, overextension kind of signals one thing. If that comes to fruition, we don't know what his future looks like. But obviously, with the career year that he had, still, I think, has a couple more years of prime football left in him, especially if he can stay healthy. But do you feel like restructure overextension was the right thing to do? Or do you've made it clear that, hey, you thought extension was going to happen. Is that what you preferred to happen?
Well, if not making an extension, again, it tells me either the Ravens didn't want to make the extension, but I don't know why they wouldn't want to get it done, because I think that he still has some talent. Even if he isn't good enough to be a corner anymore or fast enough to be with those slot receivers, you can still move him to safety and he'll still have that skill set that you're looking for at the back end. Or it could be that Marlon Humphrey decides, Darius Slayton's got a decent contract. There's a lot of these corners that I'm better than. I just got a Pro Bowl nod. So let's test it out. Let's get out there. I don't like what the Ravens are for me, so let's bet on myself next season and see what the Ravens do then, or what other teams are able to do, maybe for a trade or something like that. So I think on Marlon's side, it might be better to wait for your number. You still got a decent contract right now that you're working with. Play another good season, and you're one of the top tier corners in the league. So in my opinion, he's still a great corner. He's a great slot corner. The Ravens have an outside corner that's great in Nate Wiggins. They have a guy in TJ Tampa that we'll see what happens. I'm still very high on him. And then if they're bringing another corner, that probably spells trouble for Marlon Humphrey as far as playing time goes. But you can't go wrong with having too many corners. So I think that the Ravens would be better off keeping him. But again, the restructure tells me that it's going to be a very different situation come next season with the Marlon Humphrey Raven saga.
That has been the Raven way. You can never have too many corners. I mean, again, I'll never forget that 2014 season where they were about one corner injury away from signing you and I to go play. Get as many in as you can. I don't care how many you get in. As long as it works with the cap and they can address other positions, don't overspend there, but make sure you have as much talent as you can get. Coming up, we're going to be talking about some of the moves Baltimore could make to free up more salary cap space, because there are a couple that people have their eye on that might be more realistic than people think. So be sure to stay tuned. Plenty to talk about on Locked On Ravens. First, the show is brought to you by FanDuel. March Madness is here, and FanDuel is giving you the chance to get in on the action like never before. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 extra bucks to use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories and even who's cutting down the nets. I've got my eye on a few underdogs this year, and FanDuel makes it easy to back them with spreads, totals, and game props. The FanDuel app is simple to use, and when I win, I get paid instantly. No waiting around. So visit FanDuel.com and get in on the college hoops action all tournament long. Back here, Locked On Ravens, Kevin Oestreicher, Sam Njoku, talking Ravens football on this Friday. What a whirlwind this free agency has been. I mean, even just from the opening tip-off, which the Ravens, again, Sam, never really do anything on the first day of free agency. It's always that like 1 or 2 day 2 moves. Derrick Henry was a day 2 move last year. DeAndre Hopkins was their day 2 move this year, which we'll get into. But with the Marlon Humphrey restructure now officially done, Baltimore looks to be, at least it appears, they might be turning their focus to getting some big thing done. Whether is it a signing, is it a trade, is it them trading somebody? The big name that everyone's talking about right now is Mark Andrews, because there is still a situation. He's due a roster bonus very soon. That could dictate what happens with him. I think people are saying, oh, draft day trade him on draft day. Well, if you guarantee the roster bonus and then trade him on draft day, you're still on the hook for the roster bonus. And that just doesn't make sense from a perspective. So a resolution for that might be coming sooner rather than later. Do you feel like, Sam, the Ravens will keep Mark Andrews on their roster? Obviously, if they cut him or trade him, it frees up $11 million in cap space. They could also restructure him to take some of that money back, but not all of it, and keep him. What's your updated stance on the Ravens and Mark Andrews right now?
I'd be very surprised if he's a Raven as early as Monday. I think that roster bonus, a lot of people are talking about, just eat it. Nah, I mean, why? When it appears to be that the Ravens are looking in the direction with Isaiah Likely and Charlie Kolar. I think it's just it doesn't make any sense to just eat $4 million when the plan right now it seems to be to move on from Mark Andrews. So from what I'm hearing right now, it looks like they're shopping Mark Andrews. There's been a couple of teams that have been interested. The asking price, from what I'm hearing, is a little too high for a lot of teams to muster. I mean, from what I'm understanding, and I don't want to give too much away without concrete evidence, but it doesn't seem like they're asking for too much. But from what I understand, a lot of players, I think I put a poll out on Twitter asking what fans think Mark Andrews will be worth. A lot of fans said a day 1 pick or day 2 pick. I'd be surprised if they get anything over a 5th round pick. And I think they're looking for maybe a 3rd, maybe a 4th round pick for Mark Andrews, maybe a mixture of early day 3 picks and a late day 3 pick and for Mark Andrews. But I think that, with the Evan Ingram signing of some tight ends that are still available for other teams, it just doesn't make much sense for these teams to trade that type of assets for a player that a lot of teams know the Ravens are trying to dump off. So I don't think they cut him. I think they try and get something for him. I think they will get something for him by Monday, I believe. So I think it's over for Mark Andrews with the time in Baltimore. And it's a shame because the lasting memory will be that drop, that 2-point conversion drop. And that's no way you want to, end your time in Baltimore. Hopefully there's no hard feelings. But, yeah, I think I know the Ravens are shopping Mark Andrews. I don't know who will be acquiring his services. I think there's a couple of teams, one that, fans won't be very surprised by if it turns out to be that team. But there's a couple of teams out there that are interested. We'll just see what happens.
If Mark Andrews does get dealt, he's an all-time Raven, but the lasting memory of that 2-point conversion and the fumble is going to be what everybody remembers in this, okay, what have you done for me now lately league? And I know that the loss of Andrews, it would be a cushion of Isaiah Likely there. Likely is a top 10 tight end in the league, in my opinion. He is ready to be a tight end 1. There is no question about that. If Andrews even stayed on the roster, this will be the last year of them together. They'd have to choose either Andrews or Likely. And you and I have both said, Sam, it would be foolish if they didn't choose Isaiah Likely in this situation because of Mark Andrews' age and what Isaiah Likely has proven over the course of these first couple of years in the NFL. But it's not a small change. I think with Isaiah Likely being there, you have that, okay, they can just plug in another top 10 tight end and be fine. I think they will be fine. I'm not saying they're not going to be. But the beauty of having Andrews and Likely in this offense has been who you're going to cover. You can't cover everybody. Andrews still demands a ton of attention because he is, in my opinion, still a top 5 guy. Where do you kind of see the offensive shift for the Ravens happening with Andrews gone? Let's just play it out as if he's been traded right now. What is the shift from the Ravens offense of taking Andrews out, plugging Likely in, Charlie Kohler gets a bump as well, and then maybe they address the position at the draft, let's say on day 3 or something?
Yeah, I think that's probably what the plan is. Get a tight end either on day 2 or day 3. I want to be upset, but I'll be scratching my head if they try and move away from their 12 personnel. Having 2 tight ends on the field at the same time does wonders for Derrick Henry. It definitely puts you in a position to use Patrick Ricard more, which the Ravens just re-signed. So all of that will be very good for them. But like you said, the risk that defenses are taking when deciding whether to stop the run or stop the pass is targeted because of Mark Andrews' success, as well as Isaiah Likely's resurgence. So all of that plays a part. So without, Mark Andrews, they're playing more 11 personnel. They're playing more 3 receiver sets, which is why you saw the Ravens go out and get a guy like D-Hop, somebody that plays the intermediate game very similar to the way Mark Andrews does. So a lot of more 11 personnel means a lot less Patrick Ricard, a lot more single back formations for Derrick Henry. Derrick Henry played a lot of that in Tennessee. He's not unaccustomed to it, but it just shifts from what the Ravens were doing well last season. Now, there are perks to having an 11 personnel. You're spread out more. The defense is stretched out a little bit more. You're left guessing where the ball is going. Lamar Jackson's very good at targeting different receivers, not named Mark Andrews. So having him not on the offense does do wonders for a defensive, for the offense in terms of what the defense is looking at from your opposing offense. But all in all, it's going to be a difference there for sure. It's not going to be, Mark Andrews being gone doesn't help the Ravens at all. It hurts them. But the money associated with Mark Andrews in conjunction with having Isaiah Likely be that top tier tight end that we all know he is makes it very unlikely that Mark Andrews stays. And we'll see what the Ravens do. We'll see how they, perform without Andrews. I think Tez Walker is another guy who a lot of fans are talking about. He can come in and have a decent season. He can be a guy that stretches the field in those 4 receiver sets, something that the Ravens didn't do a lot of last year, but maybe more accustomed to doing now that they have Isaiah Likely as the true number one target. Of course, all this considering if Mark Andrews does in fact leave the Ravens, but as we mentioned, this is a hypothetical, and we're going to go with Mark Andrews not being there. And I think this does help with the passing game a lot. I'm just concerned with what this does for the run game. Of course, this is, a little different if they get some interior line help. Right now, Voorhees and Faalele are the two starting guards for the Ravens as of now, at least. That's the projection. We'll see what the Ravens do in the draft. A guy like Tyler Booker, available at the end of the first round, could shift things a little bit, make things easier for Derrick Henry in that single back formation. But yeah, not having those two tight ends makes it difficult more difficult for the Ravens to run the football. Of course, you have Derrick Henry and Lamar Jackson. Nothing's too difficult in that aspect, but it does change things quite a bit.
Yeah, and again, you're right. Nothing official right now. If it does become official, we're going to have a live on it. We're going to have plenty of content on it over here at Locked On Ravens. If you're watching this and let's say a trade has already happened, let's say the deal's already official, you tuned into this show, be sure to go check out all the other stuff we've been doing on it, because we certainly are going to have all the coverage here on Locked On Ravens. And of course, Sam, I know you're going to have coverage of it too, because it's going to be a pretty monumental move. Andrews has been a guy that came into the league with Lamar Jackson. He and Lamar have established undeniable chemistry, and that doesn't grow on trees. These two guys play street ball together. They know where the other wants them in a situation. And while Isaiah Likely is developing that with Lamar Jackson, I think we've certainly seen strides in that aspect. It would be a loss, but you are talking about, and I think you said it perfectly, the money associated with Mark Andrews is the big draw here. If Mark was making $5 million this year, this probably wouldn't be a conversation, because you're able to fit that under and still feel like you can make moves. But $11 million is not a small amount of money. So there is that happy medium of a restructure. That is something they could do. But if they want that full chunk, and whether that is then to go and make another move, like a Jair Alexander or like interior offensive line we've been talking about, that could be the avenue that they decide to take. But for Andrews, he's a player that has meant so much to the offense. And, I don't want it to just be like, oh, okay, Mark Andrews is gone, nothing happens. They didn't lose anything. I mean, it would be a loss, but you're right. With Isaiah Likely there right now, it's that, you kind of just follow, hey, look, we have another top 10 tight end. Let's just put him in. And that will be the same exact, not the same exact thing, but it's, it's better than not having a top 10 tight end. Yeah. So a lot of different situations that could happen, a lot of different outcomes, but this one being the most polarizing of the bunch because of what Andrews has meant to this team and how important he's been over the course of his career. But coming up in the final part of the show, free agency has been a whirlwind. I've been saying it all show. Sam and I are going to recap what has happened for Baltimore over these first couple of days as week one comes to a close. Stay tuned. A lot coming your way on Locked On Ravens. First, the show is brought to you by Monarch Money. Ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, entertainment, it's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app, it's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place, so you stop just managing your money and start building wealth. Instead of juggling multiple apps, you can use Monarch to check your finances, track spending, and even plan long-term goals. Managing money with your partner is smoother than ever. You can track shared and personal accounts, set goals, and stay on the same page without the stress. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNFL for half off your first year. Back on Locked On Ravens, Kevin Oestreicher and Sam Njoku diving into more Ravens content with you as the weekend approaches. Sam, Ravens kicked things off before free agency even started. The Ronnie Stanley thing was something we were talking about for a while leading up to it. 3 years, $60 million. And let me just tell you right now that $44 million guaranteed, that deal itself, Eric DeCosta, absolute heist considering what we have seen offensive linemen go for on this market. I wouldn't have been shocked if Ronnie got closer to $30 million per year on the open market had he made it there. We talked about teams like the Chiefs, teams like the Patriots all being involved. Well, the Ravens get to keep their guy. He was the best offensive lineman on the market, or at least he would have been if he made it there. But I think this was a home run move for Baltimore considering the length and the money of that deal and what everybody else is getting. Like Dan Moore, $82+ million for Dan Moore. Give me Ronnie Stanley. Give me Ronnie Stanley over all these guys at those price points.
Oh, yeah. I mean, kudos to both Eric DeCosta and, Ronnie Stanley as well. I mean, to make this thing work. And, Ronnie Stanley really wanted to be here. He's had quite a hunk of change in his time in Baltimore. So I'm sure, familiarity with the offense, the camaraderie with his teammates played a huge factor. And, they have built a family there in Baltimore, that style of family. So I know that all that played a factor. But Eric DeCosta would not let Ronnie Stanley leave that office without a contract, without leave the Ravens, without giving him the best shot. So, it's just a testament to what Eric DeCosta does. I know a lot of fans, like to, throw shade at Eric DeCosta. Being a GM and being a head coach, you're going to get thrown shade at times. So I'm sure Eric DeCosta's not unaccustomed to that. But, this is just another case of Eric DeCosta doing it to get his team ready. And we talked about it. Without Ronnie Stanley, this offense looks entirely different. The moves that the Ravens would have to make up for that loss of talent at that left side, especially on the Ravens' blind side, or Lamar Jackson's blind side, it's huge to have him in there, and it really set the tone for the rest of the week as far as free agency is concerned.
It did. And I think that for the Ravens, again, it was their typical start to free agency. They let the market play out. They didn't sign anybody. They did lose a handful of players, Sam. We talked about this, you and I, for weeks. Patrick McCary goes to Jacksonville, 3 years, $30+ million. You have Brandon Stevens going to the Jets, 3 years, $30+ million. Malik Harrison follows Patrick Queen over to Pittsburgh and reunites with his 2020 draft class buddy. That was 2 years, $10 million. You have Chris Board. They lost 2 linebackers. Chris Board goes to the Giants, and then Josh Jones went to the Seahawks. All this on day one. They didn't sign anybody. The losses that happened, are you losing sleep over any of these guys? Were you surprised at the money that they got, the teams that they went to? What's kind of your overall thought process?
I would have liked to keep Chris Board, I think, just to have some type of depth there, the inside linebacker. But for the most part, it was all par for the course, every single player. I think we actually went player by player last week to talk about who we thought were going. I think we were hitting it on the head. We knew if Ronnie Stanley was signed, McCarry was going to be gone. We knew that McCarry wasn't going anywhere. I preached that to the heavens. I knew Ricard wasn't going anywhere. I'm pretty sure the Ravens had a verbal commitment with Ricard before the free agency started, saying, let's get the Stanley situation sorted out, and then we'll move on to make sure that you're compensated. So I'm sure there wasn't any loss of sleep in Ricard's camp at all in regards to that. And then, of course, Brandon Stevens, he got a pretty decent contract. I mean, I'm a little shocked by that contract, actually. But, again, like we talked about last week, there's a DC out there, a DB coach out there who think they can fix Brandon Stevens. They saw what he did in 23 and saw the fallback in 24 and believe that a little technique issue can be sorted out for 25. But we'll see where that goes. But, that contract is pretty good. I mean, considering the season that he had, I think he was the second most in receiving yards given up in 2024. And to give him that contract is pretty substantial. But, none of the losses really meant too much. There are depth pieces. The Ravens have 11 draft picks as of now to work with. So, plenty of opportunity to shore those positions up, and the Ravens want to get younger and better, and all of that goes into it. So no surprises there. Those players, unfortunately, got let go. They get moved on to bigger and better things. We'll see what happens, but for the Ravens, it's full speed ahead.
I think Eric DeCosta is probably the happiest man on earth on Monday watching these guys leave, because what he was saying to himself. He was saying, give me the comp picks, give me those comp picks, bring them over here. So I think they fall right at the edge of that 4th to 5th. Brandon Stevens and Patrick McCary, those 2 4th to 5th round range, and then Malik Harrison, I think, qualified for 7th right now. But that's changing all offseason because of the guys that sign in the thresholds and whatnot. But really didn't do anything on day one aside from letting people walk. Then you have day 2 come around, and the news that DeAndre Hopkins signs with the Ravens was the big one for Baltimore. You and I had talked about some of these vet wide receivers, Keenan Allen, Stephon Diggs. DeAndre Hopkins was one of those names. Get him on a 1-year, $5 million deal worth up to $6 million. I've seen a mixed response from the fan base about this, Sam, because some people are saying, oh, another one of these over-the-hill wide receivers, and, this is Jeremy Maclin, this is Des Bryant, this is Deshaun Jackson. DeAndre is better than a lot of the receivers Baltimore's brought in over these last handful of seasons. He has not been healthy in 3 of the last 4 years. The one season he was healthy, he had 1,000 yards in Tennessee, 7 touchdowns, 7 of the 12 touchdowns Tennessee quarterbacks had. He's a go-get-it guy. He can come down with those contested catches. He's a bigger-bodied player. And for $5 million, Tutu Atwell got $10 million. Marquise Brown got $11 million for 1 year. Mike Williams just got $6 million. I'm taking DeAndre over any of those guys. And again, as a wide receiver 3, my point has been, okay, Nelson Aguilar / Deontay Johnson or DeAndre Hopkins. You take DeAndre Hopkins 100 times out of 100 in that situation.
Yeah, I'm not sure what fans are griping about. I think the Ravens are, this is a huge signing. Wide receiver 3, understand, Zay Flowers made the Pro Bowl last year. You have a Pro Bowl receiver already on the roster. Rashod Bateman had the most touchdowns that I've seen from him all in his entire career. I mean, I don't know how many touchdowns off the top of my head that he had, but he scored some touchdowns for the Ravens this year. You bring in another guy like DeAndre Hopkins who knows, how to play football, who knows how to get open, how to get separation. We saw a couple of times early last season where players weren't hitting the right zone, hitting the pocket where the zone didn't envelop. That's DeAndre Hopkins is not that guy. He'll know exactly where to be. He's a savvy veteran. Yeah, he's lost a step. He's not a wide receiver 1 anymore, but his skill set matches perfectly with what the Ravens need, especially with the potential loss to Mark Andrews. It's just a no-brainer. It's a home run hit. And if you're sitting here thinking, oh, well, DeAndre Hopkins is old. The Ravens are always bringing in old wide receivers. Yeah, they brought in old wide receivers in the past to be your number one guy. This is not the case. Hopkins may not even see the field half the time when the Ravens are running 12 personnel the way they did last season. This is just a guy to come in, do his job on third downs, get open, extend drives. I mean, this is a huge signing for the Ravens. The Ravens have been trying to get DeAndre Hopkins for years, and even though he doesn't have the speed that he once had, they're not going to ask him to go deep as much anymore. Of course, there'll be opportunities for Hopkins to get those 20-plus yard plays, but for the most part, he's going to be asked to hit the 7 to 10-yard route, those routes that really, give these slot corners and safeties fits. It's a huge signing for the Ravens. I think the fan base over there who are against this signing will be sinking into the tune in week 1.
And I can understand where people come from if they don't like it, but what I say is that this essentially is just a juiced up Odell Beckham Jr. signing. What I mean by that is DeAndre Hopkins is a better player at this point, in my opinion, than Odell was, and you're getting him at $10 million less. If you were paying DeAndre Hopkins $15 million, it'd be a different conversation.
Yes.
We'd be having a different conversation. But you're getting him for $5 million in the grand scheme of things, especially with the way the wide receiver market has evolved this offseason. I mean, Josh Palmer got 10 plus million from the Bills and all these other guys. I think DeAndre bargain-wise, because we talked about this with Derrick Henry last year. Saquon Barkley got his big deal. Josh Jacobs got his. Those were tens of millions of dollars per season. Derrick Henry was 8, but Derrick Henry was a little bit older, and that was some of that reasoning. But Derrick Henry still is a really good player. And I'm not saying DeAndre right now is as good as Derrick Henry is at his position. I'm not saying that whatsoever. But I just think there are similarities you can draw between a lot of these moves. Marcus Williams and Arthur Millette both released. Those were kind of housekeeping things you and I talked about. Nothing too shocking with those. The biggest loss, in my opinion, Sam, for the Ravens is one where they didn't really have a chance to retain the guy, and that is Michael Pierce. Michael Pierce retiring from the NFL, an unbelievable career, undrafted out of Samford, made a career for himself. I still remember that Saints preseason game back in 2018 for him, where he essentially fought to make the roster there. He left Baltimore, came back to Baltimore, and he was dominant all the way through. He retired when he was up. He was still a really dominant player, one of the Ravens' best interior guys last season as well. I think the Ravens are going to miss Michael Pierce a lot, both on and off the field.
Oh, yeah. On and off the field for sure. I think off the field, yeah, he's one of the heartbeats of this team, really. Especially that defensive line, Brent Urban. We all know the story between those two best friends over there. So definitely a huge loss for the Ravens when it comes to off the field stuff and in locker room stuff. But on the field too, it's definitely a big loss. We felt the loss when Michael Pierce wasn't on the field on certain situations, and now that he's not going to be around for the rest of the tenure or 2025 season, the Ravens are going to have to make a real push to get an interior lineman either via the draft or free agency or whatever. But yeah, Michael Pierce's loss is huge. He played very well last season. I'm very surprised by his absence. I know after the Bills game, there was rumors swirling that this is likely his last go-round. But man, the way that he played last year, I'm surprised that he decided to call it quits. I still think he had a lot left in the tank. Of course, you want to leave on a high note. You don't want to leave when you're struggling to make plays on the field. So he gets that in his favor. But yeah, this is a huge loss both on and off the field. And we'll see what the Ravens do. This is not going to be a position that they can ignore, considering that he was such a huge piece for that defense in 2024.
Yeah, and so Brent Urban, obviously not on the roster right now. Broderick Washington's been underwhelming since he signed that extension, and Travis Jones is a free agent after next season. So they're going to have to make some moves there to beef up that line. I think that, again, with how deep this defensive line class is in the draft, maybe that's the avenue they look to explore. But congratulations to Michael Pierce, first of all, an incredible NFL career, but certainly a tough loss for the Ravens in more ways than one. But Sam, I appreciate your time. Thanks so much for hopping on here. Tell people where they can find you and what you're working on, because I know you're staying busy.
Oh, yeah. You can find me on Instagram and Twitter, Ravenstock Podcast. You can also find our show on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. Ravenstock Pod will be doing a recap of the show after the middle of next week. After, the Mark Andrews situation potentially gets resolved, we'll see what happens. We'll talk about it either way on the show. You can also find me on TikTok at Ravenstock Podcast. I'll be doing short films, short recaps for you in case you don't like the long form content we do on YouTube.
Sam has so much cooking right now, so be sure, links in the description, follow him, subscribe, and tune in for all of his great coverage. Sam, appreciate you as always, and thank you to everybody who tuned in, watched, listened to Locked On Ravens today. If nothing happens, we'll be back here on Monday talking Ravens football. But if there is maybe a Mark Andrews move, maybe another big move for Baltimore, we'll be reacting to it live here on the show, maybe some bonus episodes. So be sure to stay tuned. I'll see you right back here soon on Locked On Ravens.